I mean, we have, if the statistics hold up, it means we have survivors in our churches, and they hear what's being said from the pulpit. They hear what's not being said. Um, and, they see these stories. And, we've reached a point where, the question comes up, where do you go for help when you're being abused? And the church really has um, eliminated themselves for
Mhm.
being a safe place. I mean, it's hard to say, well, go to the church, to get help and protection. The church itself is not safe.
And
So
that's a very sobering point, isn't it? The church is not safe.
yeah.
And it's so often true. It's not safe because we are not holding ourselves accountable like we need to across the board in solidarity to address this global pandemic of abuse, of sexual abuse, and the like.
And the same failures that we see in other pandemics are present in the Me Too, Church Too pandemic,
Mm.
because you have leadership that is uninformed and denies and um, you know ignores or covers up or mishandles or mistreats, and it's in all these pandemics that you have a re-abusing of those who are suffering from the problem, because there's an unwillingness to confront it, and there's an ineptness in how it's confronted, because churches tend to think that this is an internal matter. It's not. It's a criminal matter,
Mhm, mhm.
and we need to report to law enforcement. We need the help of trauma counseling professionals. There needs to be an outside independent investigation of what has happened. And the church leaders have been inclined to believe that they're sufficient to handle these kinds of things, and they're not.
Mm.
They're just not. And it's wrong to expect that of them.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And a couple of points that you've made as we transition, I just want to highlight again. It said, why does it take so many to move it forward? And I think that's always true, I believe, in social dynamics. Even what we're seeing now in terms of racialization, Black Lives Matter, groups, individuals who never were part of the discussion at all, now seemingly moving forward and saying we support this. I think of the NFL. I mean, the NFL's supposed change on
Mhm.
these matters. But there's a tipping point. Again, there's a tipping point in crowd dynamics and social structures, how we think in terms of structuration. And with evangelicals, our religious tribe, so to speak, because we emphasize so much the individual personal relationship with Jesus, which is a hallmark of our tradition. I'm not demeaning that in any way, shape, or form. We often tend to fail to see that if we only emphasize the personal individual relationship, we're never going to have the kind of impact socially that we can have if we don't couple that with collective social solidarity, which is a hallmark of other faith traditions, including other Christian traditions. And so we need to couple that personal individual with the collective emphasis, like Church Too, that there is a collective voice. And then also, just I wanted to highlight this as well as we move forward. You mentioned the parallel with other pandemics and the masking, the denying. We're hearing right now, well, and we reflect upon the recent past, nah, this COVID-19 or this coronavirus, it's fake news, it's not really happening. Well, look at the impact of that. Look at the impact of that in our society.
Mhm.
Denying that it was the case or minimizing it, thinking that it really isn't an issue or that it's over and
Being
there won't be a second wave. Well, the second wave seems to be coming. That's not fake news. But again, I think all these things are connected. And while you see abuse sexually, certainly in both political parties, the two major political parties in our country, it's not to say it's just on one side of the aisle. Nonetheless, for evangelicals, where we may place ourselves, we need to get our own house in order. both religiously, in terms of how we identify culturally, politically, and hold people accountable on whatever the issue, whether it's on science, on pandemics like coronavirus, or sexual abuse as well. As hard as it is to deal with sexual abuse in society at large, Carolyn, I wonder if it is harder, and you've already alluded to this in some respects, but I wonder if it is harder to address it in the church culture. What do you think of that? And if you agree, why do you think that might be harder?
Some of it has to do with what you just said, that the gospel is about personal salvation, and that our goal is to evangelize, and not that should change how we live, not just morally, but socially, as you say, that this is God's world that he loves and that he created to flourish, and he created it for every human being to flourish. And as his image bearers, we join our creator in that. And it's not just that we are activists, but as we should be, but it's that we embody what this is. And we don't. We fight among ourselves. We value some people more than others in our congregations.
And James has a lot to say about that in James 1 and 2.
Oh my goodness, and so, to bring our Christianity into the news, to bring our Christianity into how we think about everything, to say, okay, how does this, how am I working out my salvation with fear and trembling? I don't have all the answers. I look at these crises and I don't understand everything about it. I'm not a doctor. I can't diagnose, what COVID means and how it spreads and what we should do. I have to listen to the experts and the medical professionals who are telling us what to do. And, I'm a white, privileged American, and there are so many things about the COVID pandemic and the racial pandemic that I escape because I am white. And I have to listen. And people in power need to listen to women and men who are speaking out about sexual violence and abuse. Because, the biggest problem that we have is thinking we understand. And then we need to wrestle with how does my Christianity call me to engage or support or whatever it is. I'm as an image bearer, I'm not a spectator. I'm not on the outside. I have responsibility. And we all do. And one of the things that has impacted me so much is the book of Ruth, where somebody who's on the outside, somebody who's in a different race, somebody who's impoverished, somebody who has none of the connections or attributes that would bring value or meaning to her in the eyes of the community, is God's point person in that moment of history. And I don't look at the big name women in the Bible. I look at Ruth, and she puts me to shame. And I think, if Ruth, why not me? If Ruth, why not you? Who are we to say that what we're doing that nobody sees or notices is strategic for God's kingdom purposes today. You know, we don't know what God is doing, and we don't know how he's working, and he just might be working through us.
Amen. I say, preach it, sister, preach it. And if we read the Bible like you read the Bible and study it like you study the